This episode of Kodsnack is sponsored by Snyk. Find out more about them and try all their cool security tools at snyk.io. Snyk.io. Links to everything we discuss are of course available and easily clickable inside the show notes. Welcome to Kodsnack. It's a strange name to pronounce in any other language, I think. But welcome to Kodsnack, Guy.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so for the listeners who are not me and have read the brief, who are you and what do you do?
I am Guy Podjarny, and I am the founder of Snyk. Snyk is a developer security company, and what we do, which we can kind of get into in a bit more depth, is we build security tools developers actually want to use, actually love. A little bit of my background is I come from I'm Israeli. I was in the cyber parts of the Israeli army, came as a developer, and as a developer went through, let's see, a startup, got acquired by a startup, got acquired by IBM in the AppSec space, founded a web performance company, sold it to Akamai, and I was a CTO at Akamai for a bunch of years. Before moving, and there was during that time I spent about a decade in Ottawa, Canada, where I moved to London with Akamai before leaving it to found Snyk. So that's kind of I'm a developer by trade, and moved to product and CTO roles before joining Snyk. And I guess at Snyk, I'm the president, which doesn't actually say much.
It's one of those very generic titles.
I spend my time mostly focusing on what's next. I think about strategy, I think about where we're headed, and trying to help mobilize both the company and the community as a whole towards kind of better and bigger kind of movements around this developer security change. I run a podcast myself as well called The Secure Developer, where I get to host smart, security leaders typically, or sometimes developer leaders that are really tackling this challenge of how can they, improve security without hindering velocity or development velocity. And so, if you're interested in listening more, sort of hearing more about how to build security programs that actually scale, then you can check out the Secure Developer.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess all that interesting background stuff would probably be an entire other episode. So I guess we'll save that for another day. But what leads you to start a company in this particular area? It's not exactly a common thing to hear about.
So Snyk is to an extent a culmination of my two journeys. For the first decade, I was in AppSec. And this was like the first iterations of application security, trying to really kind of explain to people that SQL injection is something they should care about, and what it is. And during that time, even back then, we were saying things like shift left. We were talking about sort of early move these automated security tests to be earlier in the development process, and so. Even back then we wanted it, but we couldn't really. We succeeded financially with the products by selling it to auditors, and then we kind of shoved it into some builds and some IDEs. But it was really these sort of auditor products that was sort of placed in the developer surrounding. Mm-hmm. And then I left security and I founded a web performance company, and this was sort of the first wave of DevOps. I was a part of the programming committee of Velocity, where DevOps really kind of came to be. And the company that I founded, Blaze.io, really was almost like a compiler for web pages. It sort of would modify web pages, pick different ordering or such for your JavaScript, modify your images and such to make the page faster. And that got acquired by Akamai, where I was CTO. And throughout that time, I was very much a part of that sort of DevOps movement, which first disrupted the performance industry. You had, I don't know who in the audience kind of remembers Gomez or Keynote, or those were the giants at the time of application performance monitoring, or APM, and they got sort of, they fell by the wayside of New Relic and AppDynamics and Dynatrace. And so, well, actually, Gomez acquired Dynatrace and then renamed to Dynatrace, and then I think a PE firm bought them and Keynote and turned it. Dynatrace is a little bit different, but So during that time, I learned to appreciate DevOps and the changes that it brought about, and I saw, even from Akamai's lens, how important it was to work the way DevOps teams want to work, above and beyond the functionality we provide. Mm-hmm. And so Snyk is kind of the culmination of those two journeys. On one hand, it aims for the same kind of aspiration of bringing security into development. But on the other hand, it comes with a certain understanding from DevOps that really the core to get, to, first of all, that this is more needed than ever, that, in the sort of era of DevOps, security has to be built into software development because, the pace is different and the autonomy of teams is critical. And secondly, is that the way to achieve that is to focus more on the user, to focus more on how people work and how to build a security tool that actually fits into their surroundings. So,
so the user and the developer using the tools.
Yeah, I like to. So like Snyk's kind of ethos is this dev first security, and I really enjoy talking to sort of CISOs and telling them, which typically I get nods and approvals for this, and telling them, like, you might sign the check, but you're not the most important user of my product. The most important user of the product is the developer, because the risk we both face the most, the biggest risk, is that developers don't actually pick up the tool. And in the DevOps surrounding of speed and continuous development, the only way to really do that correctly is to build a tool developers actually want to embrace. So.
It's such a widespread problem as well. It's really easy to, you sell a tool to someone and then they start paying the bills, and then you go back later and ask, are you actually using it? Or am I using the tool I paid for 6 months ago? Whether it's security or something else. We have some tools like that which feel like I'm a little bit ashamed because I know I should be using this stuff more and I would get value out of it, but it's just not quite there somehow. So
no, absolutely. And I think the beauty in the market as a whole, the beauty of SaaS products as a whole and bottom-up products is that your confidence about them actually being used is higher and higher because you are, you're using before you're buying, right? Developers like to discover tools in a different way, to use tools in a different way, and they're sort of night and day. If you contrast. And sorry, I kind of digress from your question a fair bit here.
No problem. We like digressions.
So if you think about how developer tools market, kind of bring to market and come to your awareness, and how security tool markets, they're night and day. Mm-hmm. Developers like depth. As a developer, if I'm a JavaScript developer, I couldn't care less if you support PHP or not, but it better be amazing for JavaScript. Java, it's my world. And today in the cloud native world, it's really more like, I am a Node.js developer, deploying with, Kubernetes on AWS and, using, Express web server or whatever it is, right? And so the tools better be amazing for my stack. And I really don't care if they support any other stack as far as my usage is concerned. So they prefer depth. And for security gravitates towards breadth, because if I tell you want to tackle, say, securing open source libraries, right, or your use of open source, and I'm going to only support your Node.js apps, which make up 20% at best, 30% of your platform, that means you need to buy another tool to secure, the rest of the apps, or maybe multiple tools. And it's already hard enough to deal with all the security threats out there. And so having multiple tools for the same threat and being able to govern reasonably the security of the organization is really hard. And so security tends to go broad. And accordingly, developers discover tools by seeing what the community uses, seeing what open source projects use, focused, by the tool that works best in your community. And security people, because they like that breadth, they tend to buy solutions that would work across the company. So it tends to be much more of a top-down type sale, deep assessment, sometimes relationships. And so those two worlds couldn't be more different. So that was really the challenge was around how do we bring that sort of developer ethos into this world of security.
Yeah. So how do you do it?
I think I guess I'll give you the present and maybe the journey, and maybe what we got to. So in terms of journey, I guess naivety helped.
It does.
So,
it does.
and conviction. So we were, for 2 years into the company, we had 100,000 annual recurring revenue, which if you don't know startups is not great. So like at that point, we raised millions of dollars.
Yeah.
We had tens of thousands of developers using the product, and nobody was paying. But so the reason we were in this state is because we were just laser focused on getting developers to love the product. And we've built a bunch of innovations, which we can probably talk about a little bit more later, because I think they're interesting beyond security, to really try and figure out how would at the time, open source security or securing your open source usage, how would a solution like that, if you only cared about the developer, if you only cared about what would be the best solution for a developer who wants to tackle securing their use of open source, what would that be? And so that focus really got us the developers, but we totally missed the fact that the security people had that. And then we built that deep product, but fortunately we picked a space that was big enough and small enough. It was big enough that it matters, that we could do a great job helping you tackle this problem. And it was hard enough for you to deal with it yourself, knowing which vulnerabilities are out there, knowing which dependencies you're using, be able to remediate that in an ongoing fashion, rolling that out across your project. That was hard. But it was also consistent enough that doing this for Node or doing this for Java or doing this for Go or doing this for Python has a different technology element, but has a lot of similar concepts. And so we managed to broaden well enough and survive. And as soon as we sort of were broad enough, then the momentum of having that sort of developer love has really built up the adoption of the business as well. Today, we know to talk about this a little bit more wisely, and we have a depth-first approach to new products that we ship. So when we shipped our container security product, or when we shipped our infrastructure as code security product, we ship a narrow product, but they're good. They're always good products. They're always high quality, high end, always developer first. Always products we are proud of, but they are narrow. They're not enough to really sustain a product. So we ship them as an add-on. You have to buy one of the other products and you ship it. For example, infrastructure as code, we shipped at the beginning only Kubernetes security. So if you had a Kubernetes configuration file in your repo, we will find that and we would flag, if you're running something as root when you shouldn't have, or you left ports open or such. And that was super useful to that subset of people, but it was nowhere enough to sort of secure your whatever cloud setup, right? And then we expanded it. We added Helm charts. We added Terraform. We added CloudFormation. So we're still expanding it, but the product is always deep and always developer first. And today we can afford that because we can anticipate what will happen, as we broaden. And we repeat that, so we turn that into a strength.
Yeah, so it was the right order to do things in, I guess, even if it was.
Yeah, well, if you don't do that, exactly. If you don't do that, then what you end up doing is you end up being shallow, and it's it's the beauty, like the blessing and the curse of having a user-focused versus buyer-focused go-to-market. So because we're focusing on the user, the developer, then if we get it right, it can be extremely powerful. And I think we do get it right, but it means you're further away. There's another step before you actually get to monetization, because you have to build a product, then you have to get the users, and only then you have to satisfy the buyer. So it's another step. So it's harder.
Yeah, and then you have to keep resisting the urge to make the buyers happier than the users.
I think that's a very good point, actually. And so what we do today, if I just kind of run with that a bit further, is that's actually a very real interpretation. So Snyk is, we're about 800 people now, and we've grown a lot, right? We've gone in annual increments, we've gone from 23 people to 84 people to 250 to 450 to 800. So like every year we would at first 3-4x and then double the size of the company. And So it's high growth and it's all great, and that's what you aspire to when you're sort of building a company. But as we build that out, there's definitely a lot of demand still on the enterprises, on the buyers. At some point, we realized that we need to shield this sort of developer focused people. We need enough people in the company that quite literally don't care about revenue and purely care about sort of the broad developer adoption. And so we shielded those, and it's a bit more elaborate than don't care about revenue, but we have a separate product-led growth group, which has actually been renamed Developer Journeys recently, and they do care now about revenue. It started a bit more sort of abstract, but they care about developers. Like their job is entirely focused on how do we get developers to be more successful with the product? How do we get more developers to embrace the product? Yeah. And so that focus, that lens helps us actually level up a bunch of things that, we got a few things right at the beginning and then they might have gone stale a bit or not improved. And then this group is now renovating, reinventing really
Yeah. It's such interesting challenges we have. I mean, I've seen so many versions of that in places I worked, and other people I've heard talk about it as well. It's suddenly you tend to end up with some frustrated salesperson off to one side who's like, don't you see, if we just did this and this, then we would sell this much in this time. Yes, but it doesn't fit together with all the other stuff.
Exactly. Well, it's a good time to be a developer because I think as a developer today, more and more of the world revolves around us. I don't know, like I still identify as a developer, so I guess I'll still use us, versus you, because that's still although I'm a bit rusty around my actual coding skills, but I think it's all it's nice. Like we're sort of, the industry is removing obstacles from around us.
It's fascinating how much influence we have everywhere. Really, do you think that will change? By the way.
No, it's the short answer. I think so. I think it's the other way around. I think when you look at the trends around development, I think really what's happening is we are removing obstacles that sit in front of creation. We're trying to remove the obstacles to creation, and in the process of that, when you look at DevOps and how the kind of the cultural changes, not just the technology changes or the process changes that it brought about, it really drives this notion of independent dev teams. It's all about development teams that are able to, pick up the ball at one end of the court and run with it all the way to the other, basket in or not, and then run to the other side and do that again and do that again and again and again and again. And the teams need to be independent. They can't be too dependent on some coach on the side or someone yelling them instructions. Like they need to be, maybe I'm overstressing the sort of the basketball analogy here, but still, like they need to be able to run without any bottlenecks. Yeah. And the better they do that, right? The more, the faster that loop, from writing a line of code to getting it in the hands of a customer to learning from that customer and coming back, the better, the more competitive the business is. And the more independent the teams are, the more scalable the business is. Yeah. And so fundamentally, I think the world is going more and more and more towards actually driving that independence. And what we need to do as an industry is we need to adapt to that reality. On the tooling side, or actually I'll start the other way around. So on the developer side, we need to acknowledge that taking more independence means more responsibility. The whole like with great power comes great responsibility lens. And so as a developer, you have to accept that your job is not just to write code that is functional. DevOps has kind of brought about this notion of you build it, you run it. So you also need to build code that is operable, that you actually are able to run. Yep. And then the security is a part of that lens. You have to build software you've, in theory, always needed to write code that's secure, but you need to do it. Yeah, but you need it. But now you need to do it on your own. And then on the industry side and on the security team side, we need to embrace more of a platform approach that really seeks to make it easy. So it's hard. Like developers, it's on one hand, a great time to be a developer. On the other hand, it can be a pretty stressful time because everything kind of comes to you. And so I think the job of everybody revolving developers, and that includes security team, although they don't always like to think about themselves that way, is to be platform builders that help developers build secure software more easily. And if that's done well, then developers will embrace it. And because every developer in the world, if it's the same effort to build secure software, then if it's the same effort to build software that is secure or isn't secure, like practically everybody would prefer to choose to sort of build security, build the secure software. But it's not the same effort. The industry has made it quite hard to build secure software. So that's what we're trying to change.
Yeah, and I guess it makes a lot of sense now that you talk about it and connect it with the tools as well. Because one thing I've been thinking about every now and then when we talk about, you add the DevOps thinking and talking, and you add the DevSecOps talking and thinking, and it's like the area of responsibility is always widening. It seems like, or feels like. Yep. But then it makes a lot of sense when you start talking about, then because of that, the tools need to build away the obstacles so that you actually can take on that wider responsibility, I guess.
Yeah, precisely. And it's the reality. Security. Sometimes people talk about security, as though it's the center. And security is not the center. Security is a service provider to the business. The business is the center. So you can be secure all the way to bankruptcy. If the best way to be secure is like just unplug from the internet. Do that because you are actually trying to sort of survive, pay the bills of all these sort of security people, and so business comes first. And security needs to sort of accept that reality, right? And do its best to secure it in that fashion. And so this speed of development, this agility, there's another non-security, well, I guess a little bit security trend that's happening, which is on one hand, it's around platforms making it easier to build secure code. And on the other side, there are platforms that try to remove security responsibility in the first place from the need. So if you think, for instance, about React, they changed the framework, the foundation to make cross-site scripting just very, very hard to do. If you think about serverless in cloud platforms, that's an approach that takes away certain responsibility. But at the same time, it's never going to go away. As long as we, as developers, create functionality, as long as we make decisions around our setup, there are going to be security implications, and we need to accept that dealing with those is our responsibility. And we'll need platforms to make it.
It's not something you can. I really wish I didn't have to think about this. It doesn't really help. Still need to know what, and I guess also know what you're building on top of. As well, I mean, if I pick up some kind of platform or technology and don't really know what it's doing, I'm not that much more secure.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, that needs to be easier, right? Sometimes the tools themselves need to surface that, right? Like some solutions you use right away require two-factor authentication, and some don't, right? Like some solutions you use that. So like sometimes the tools themselves can make that better, and then sometimes it's on you, the consumer. That the developer consuming those services or those SDKs or those open source libraries to invest in thinking about making the right decisions. Yeah.
So should we talk a bit about the tools you create, or which?
For sure. So let me kind of get a little bit deeper into Snyk itself. So Snyk is a developer security platform. And the idea is, per everything we just discussed, is really around making it easy for you to, develop fast and stay secure. Instead of trying to just sort of focus on fixing one aspect or the other, we cover the whole cloud native application scope. So we have 4 products: code, open source, container, and infrastructure as code, which in turn really try to secure that aspect of your application. At the end of the day, for a developer and for a security person, they feel like one product. You come along, you add your repo, or you run Snyk in your build, or you add us to your IDE, and it would basically work as that buddy that's looking at your code constantly and says, okay, hey, here's a security mistake. In the IDE, it would work almost like a spelling mistake, a spell checker. Sorry, not like a spelling mistake, like a spell checker that points out when you're making a security mistake, literally with that sort of squiggly line, like our kind of the linters, and would point that out and would help you fix it. If you stop to imagine. It's just as a side point, you think about developer usability. Yeah. It's amazing how security tools do not think about remediation. They just think about finding problems. Oh, yeah. We really made it an emphasis to actually focus on fixing the problem. If you stop and you think about a spell checker that would tell you when you're misspelling something, that doesn't tell you what is the correct spelling of it. I mean, that tool is not going to stick around for a long time, right? And so,
why does everyone hate it? It's so strange.
and then we stop to imagine why people are not embracing these security tools. Yeah. Okay, so we do, we tell you about the problem and we tell you what's the right solution. Sometimes, whenever possible, we actually implement the solution for you in the form of a code change or picking the right version of the library. We work in your Git surrounding, because in Git really is where code review happens. And so we would inspect every pull request to say, are you introducing a security problem right now or not? And if so, again, how to fix it, including opening fix PRs to your repository with the necessary changes. And we would work within your build systems and your deployment systems to actually apply guardrails. And you do need to, a part of developing secure software also means putting a system that doesn't allow certain mistakes. If there is a critical vulnerability, if there is a certain legal violation, if there are things that are out of an important policy, you want those to just break the build, disallow something path. So that those guardrails are in place and you can't make those mistakes. So we work across all of those surroundings and more. And we bring, and in fact, maybe an interesting conversation, we can talk a little bit about what does it mean to be dev first in some of these products, but each product has a dev first thesis that comes to it.
And it sounds like it covers a really wide array of security type problems. I mean, you mentioned license violations or something in the middle there as well.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think so. It always everything we do at Snyk comes back to that developer experience. And so as a developer, first of all, you don't want one security solution popping out when you edit one file and another one when you edit the other. And so in the cloud native development world, especially, the same repository can have, a Docker file that secures the operating system. It'll have your POM.XML file or package.json file or, RubyGem file. And that states which libraries you're using. It might have even a Terraform file or a Helm chart or a serverless YAML file that specifies, which infrastructure configuration, right? And of course, it has your code. So all of these things are in the same spot. You don't think of them as, this is like a totally different independent entity that I'm running. It's a different tech stack, but so you want one solution that, or one tool, one helper that flags things. So that's the reason for the breadth. But also as we build out the depth of these different capabilities, you want them to be interrelated. So if I tell you that a container is vulnerable, you would want to know if that container is also running as a root in your Kubernetes cluster. So we will know that, right? And we'll kind of flag that. It would change your approach versus one that isn't, right? Or if I tell you that a library is vulnerable, you would want to know whether your code is actually invoking the vulnerable part of the library, because you're probably not using 100% of that library. And so we aim to sort of flag that. And so it's a never-ending journey, and there's a lot for us to still invest in connecting these pieces to create this holistic view. But that's the other reason that we think all of these belong together, is because really we talk about sort of three core components. We talk about application intelligence. So how well do we understand your app? We need to understand it as well as you do as a developer, or better sometimes. Which dependencies are you using? How is your code calling them? How are they wrapped in containers? How is your infrastructure configured? Which APIs are you using? So all these elements, like application intelligence, is really around covering that. We need to provide security intelligence. So we need to have the security expertise, because developers are not going to become security experts. So we need the platform to be one itself so that it can surface that. So sometimes it means security rules, like knowing, what does a cross-site scripting vulnerability look like, or knowing every cloud configuration that exists and what are the secure and insecure settings. So that's one aspect. Or it's about known vulnerabilities. So when some library out there, has some maintainer has fixed the vulnerability and said as much in the release notes, and that kind of disappears into the ether of GitHub, we fish those out and we understand them, and we give them a severity, and we tell you if there's an exploit in the wild that is actually actively exploiting them, and what is the vulnerable piece of code within the library, and we write an advisory. And so that security expertise sits there, and those two need to be wrapped with great developer experience, because as we talked about several times here, if that doesn't exist, it doesn't matter. You're not going to use it, because there's so much a developer needs to do. It has to be a great developer experience.
I mean, I'm reminded of that recent discussion about NPM audit, which goes through your whole node modules and reports everything that's ever had a security advisory for all the libraries and all the sub-libraries. And it's not wrong, but it's totally out of context, and it doesn't tell you, are you actually using any of this? Or is it a subdependency of a development dependency that will never affect you in production? And it goes to show the challenge and the importance of solving that in a good way.
And it's hard. And, I think Snyk is doing great here. I don't think we're done. I think there's a lot that we can still improve. But fundamentally, that's the core. It's about, well, first you need to know about them, because the easiest way to not create a lot of noise is to just not tell you about the problem. But that doesn't actually keep you secure. No. So I don't think anybody is intentionally giving you poor results, but sometimes people are talking about, a certain tool being less noisy, and it's less noisy because it just misses.
It doesn't log anything.
That's not very useful. So you have to do it, but then you have to do it in a way that is actually usable. And there are a lot of elements of it. And sometimes the challenge is with software, it's oftentimes hard to make absolute statements about the assessment. And so when we just say, hey, this is just not an issue. Dev dependencies is a good example. Snyk by default, dev dependencies are not there. You can add a --dev action to your CLI and you'll get them, but otherwise not really. It's not on by default, and it's purely omitted from the list. Most of our insights focus more on prioritization. So what we've done is we've created this priority score that goes from 0 to 1,000, and actually try to encompass within that score everything that would make you prioritize this vulnerability. Of course, the severity of the vulnerability is the starting point, but also, is it fixable? If it's fixable, it gets higher score, right?
It makes sense. Yeah.
It's less of the intention. Is there an exploit in the wild? Is it running in Kubernetes, in kind of in a root cluster that is exposed to the internet? And also some organizational policies and things like that. They all factor in, combine into that priority. So you just sort of know what the items are at the top. And as we get smarter and smarter, which kind of constantly the platform always improves, as I mentioned before, always improves that the depth that it has both on the application intelligence and the security intelligence front, then it improves the results. It improves the priority, and you choose as a user, what threshold you want.
Yeah. That also saves a lot of problems when you turn on warnings of some kind in an environment, and I have 6,000 now. That's so useful.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's no probably the best example for trying to tackle this problem is Snyk code. Maybe I'll dig a little bit into it. So So Snyk Code is a newer product from Snyk. It is a static analysis product, so it analyzes your custom code, your actual application code, to find security mistakes. And we acquired this company named DeepCode, which was based in Zurich and came out of the ETH University there. It's just a brilliant math, and it really rethought static analysis. So let's talk about the product's needs for a sec, right? As static analysis has become this poster child of how not to be developer friendly. It issues, it takes forever to run. It gives you primarily false positives. It is very hard to deploy. It doesn't support different stacks. It has all this sort of wonder. So it really needed, and like when you think about how do you build a developer first static analysis product, conceptually, it's pretty easy. It just needs to be dramatically faster, very accurate, deal with the different proliferations of APIs and all of that they are getting created. And it needs to also not just tell me about the problem, but also help me figure out how to fix it.
Yeah.
Simple. Very simple.
How hard can it be?
So like the product requirements are very simple. The tech
clear.
Deliver on them, not so much.
No.
And the team at DeepCode, which we still call it the DeepCode engine within Snyk Code, has basically reinvented static analysis. And it's pretty, to geek out a sec here, it's pretty interesting how it works. So what the DeepCode engine does is it sort of brings a machine learning or big data approach to static analysis. First, on the code side, it takes the code, and instead of traditionally static analysis would sort of traverse the code and try to see, okay, how does data flow and how does execution flow here, through functions and through other calls, and then it would prune the tree. It would keep dropping nodes because it's too much otherwise to hold in memory to be able to scale. And instead, what DeepCode does is it takes the code and it creates these data log key value pairs. So it kind of converts it into data. And then it repeatedly, recursively goes over that data log and creates smarter and smarter insights around saying, okay, so data flows in this fashion. It starts from just like this data got copied to this variable, or like, fairly atomic units. So that's on one hand, and because of some smart technology and innovation over there, and also because of just innovations in the big data space that this taps into, it creates a much faster analysis of the code. On the other side, it uses a similar type of encoding to encode all the code that is out there. Think of it as like all of GitHub and all of its history. It's actually more than that, but all of its GitHub and all of its history.
Just small stuff.
Just a little bit of data, a little bit of code. And then when you build rules there, it works in a semi-supervised machine learning model. So what it does is you kind of give it 10 sources of information, say form-filled reads or things like that. So like 10 APIs that exist in how you would read a form. And then 10 sinks, security sensitive sinks, like a database call or something like that, right? And so you give it 10 of that. And then you say, go find me others. And the system finds similarly patterned rules in that kind of archive of open source or other code sets. And it comes back and it's semi-supervised because a person there, a master student or a security analyst in our team would sort of say, yes, this is or isn't classified. And eventually the rules become very robust. And so now they will scale to the proliferation of an API. If some new framework jumps out or some, new version, a new API get introduced in an existing system, this rule is very smart because the patterns of code that follow that interface would look very similar to the patterns of code that follow the other. And we will see many examples of it. And therefore we will identify that API. So the rules become very robust to scale to the fragmentation of the software ecosystem today and not miss issues. Similarly, and so it allows us to build these very rules. It also allows us to scale to new ecosystems very quickly because really all we need to do is encode the language and then go through this exercise of routinely doing it. And that time in turn allows us to, we can spend that time refining or finding kind of additional security rules logic because we don't need to waste all of our time just mapping out APIs and frameworks manually. So our team is just sort of better able to use their time. And then the real beauty of it, so we combine, so we build these rules, they find these vulnerabilities. And then there's some math that I personally do not understand that intersects these graphs. These data log pairs are actually represented as graphs. But the rules are written in Datalog, and the graph is in Datalog, and we intersect them, and it results in a scan that is an order of magnitude. In fact, from our assessments, between 10 and 30 times faster than existing alternatives, and is extremely accurate because of that sort of big knowledge base that it works off. And then probably the best part of it is that it looks through all these problems, and because it can scan all the code in history, it can find all the fixes. So it can find all these repeated patterns of people having found a problem and repeatedly modified it in certain ways to make the problem go away. And so and again, you can have that in sort of somewhat semi-supervised, but you find all the ways of fixing. And so when we tell you about a problem, we actually tell you, and here are 3 real world examples from real projects that are very contextualized to your problem and how they fixed it in real code. And this will eventually lead to automated fix pull requests and just sort of, change code modifications. But we're not quite there yet, but, we'll be there. And then once we do, you can easily see how we would scale that to additional. So
wow.
Anyways, I'm excited by this. I think it's a good approach. And it's been taking the world by storm, like I think we've I haven't even, it's not even all of the exciting things about the code. The other beauty of it, which is important here for the, sorry, I'm very excited about the code. But the other beauty of it is it works on source code, not on built code. So most static analysis solutions require built code.
Yes.
And what that means is we're actually able to scan it in the Git repository. So if you're an open source repository, you can just add Snyk code to your path, and we did just that. So it's actually available in freemium fashion, so any open source project can just use it, and there's a certain amount of free use for private code as well, and which in turn just gives us more data to work with, because we sort of see user behavior and its improvement. So it's getting this very, very broad adoption. And even within a company, it is easier to roll it out because typically there's only 1 or 2 at best Git servers that you plug into, and you can scan the whole thing versus needing to add it to every single pipeline. And so the end result of that is, for instance, we had a fairly aggressive business case when we acquired Deepcode, and we've, I think, sold in Q3 as much as we thought we were going to sell in the whole year. Not up to Q3, but like just in Q3. A demonstration of the sort of the level of adoption because it's touching a very real pain. And I think it's fairly brilliant technology. But it all comes back to that simple product requirements list and just being super devoted to saying, I know it's hard, but let's make this happen. And in this case, it was about searching long and hard until we found Deepcode, and then working with them to sort of build the right product around this incredible engine.
So if I would add this to my React application that we have at work, it would basically translate it into data pairs and then look, okay, you have this pattern over here. People who have this pattern have this vulnerability. Here are 4 suggestions for how people with your pattern solved it.
Yeah, that's precisely it. So like the data log piece and all that is behind the scenes. You wouldn't.
Yeah, of course.
But what you would see is basically that squiggly line that says, "Hey, you've got a vulnerability here.
Yeah.
Here's the vulnerability." So we'll tell you data flowed through here and through there, and therefore this is a SQL injection or whatever vulnerability. And then here are fix recommendations that you'll have. That, as I said, eventually will actually be the aspiration is right click and kind of autocorrect to the secure mode. We're not quite there yet, but that's the journey.
Yeah, and considering everything you've said so far, I suspect that it's kind of easy for me as an interested developer to get started with this as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I have this sort of equation that became this sort of it's really true for everything in life, but I use it for work here. Which is, everything we do in life, there's how much you care and there's how hard it is. And generally, you really need to care more than it is hard for you to do it. Now, caring comes in the form of many ways. Is it expensive? Is it time consuming? Does it require no, actually, time consuming and expensive are kind of more on the ease side. But caring is in security is more around am I afraid of this sort of security problem? Am I is this an organizational policy? Do I just sort of think of it as something that is my responsibility? And the security industry has been very, very focused on sort of increasing that bar. But the how hard it is, that includes those things I talked about, which is like, is it a lot of money if I need to pay for it, or does it require a lot of expertise, or just time, and time investment for me to do. And I think what we've done at Snyk is, we as an industry, we keep trying to bump up the caring piece. The security industry is all about fear mongering and kind of
guilt tripping.
And they're not false fear. Like it is a very real and immediate threat.
Yeah.
But what we've done at Snyk is we dropped the how hard it is.
Yeah.
We really, really invest in just a next experience. And then, developers are this, amazing audience that on one hand, it needs to just work. I don't care that my application is super complex, and I don't care, you have like 5 seconds to satisfy it, like a next experience, it better work and be magical. Yeah. And then it needs to be entirely and fully customizable. Yeah.
Again, simple stuff.
That's the combination. That's the simple requirements of a developer. And so what we do is we build a set of opinionated integrations into Git, into development environment. So we built opinions that satisfy the first need. You do next, and we'll do something great for you according to our opinions. And then we have a CLI and an API, kind of a command line interface and an API that are the Swiss Army knife. They are, you can do with them what you will. And generally any manipulation and modification, it's all automation friendly. A --JSON will give you a JSON output, but also the APIs are structured, and so you can morph it as you want. And generally we see that organizations end up using both, but our aspiration, and typically the reality, is they mostly use the opinionated paths, and then they would sort of enrich that with with the customization.
And so how do I start as an individual developer in a team who's curious about trying some of the stuff?
So, I mean, to try it out, you just need to go to snyk.io and press the sort of get started
I can do that
button over there. If you're able to install it on GitHub, so if you have some open source projects or if it's in your organization, then you can just do a next and connect it to your GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab account with a simple flow. If you are unable to kind of run this on Git because you don't have permissions or sort of not yet comfortable, you can just try it out on the CLI. So it's just a npm install or brew install Snyk, and then just sort of run Snyk test, and you'll see it. There's also a Snyk fix. Now, if you run Snyk test --help, you'll find many flags that you can do, but you don't generally, back to that kind of magic moment, is you shouldn't really need them. You should be able to just sort of run Snyk test, and most of the time it would get it right. What is important also, if you do go the CLI route, is it's important to also run Snyk monitor. What Snyk monitor would do is it would actually capture a snapshot of your libraries, and it would now test them on a regular basis. I believe the default is a weekly basis, and it would alert you to whether new vulnerabilities are disclosed in the libraries that you are consuming. Unlike even coding mistakes, you can say that our knowledge improves and we might find a problem we previously missed. However, in known vulnerability land, this is especially common. You are using libraries. The libraries are legit today. There's no known security flaw in the version that you've picked. And then the next day, lo and behold, someone finds a bug that was there all along. It happens to be a security bug, also known as a vulnerability, and then that gets disclosed. And so here, like a cat and mouse game kind of begins around, a race to see, do you fix that vulnerability first, or does an attacker exploit it? And so the idea is Snyk monitor would take a snapshot of what libraries you're actually using, and if a new vulnerability gets disclosed affecting one of those libraries, we will alert you to it. We'll send you an email or whatever configuration you set up. If you connect to the Git repositories, all of that is just, it's a part of the next flow. So we'll just sort of let you know. So it's not really hard to do it without them either. It's a Snyk monitor command, but you'll want to put that into your build. And
of course.
The docs, if you Google Snyk docs, all of that should be very easily handhold you through that.
Yeah, we'll put in lots of links in the show notes, of course, as well. I like to do that. So I guess we have a few minutes left. Is there anything else in particular we should cover, or?
Well, I'd like to maybe end with a bit of a slightly different call to action, for people. So I think as developers or security people, we're pretty privileged in this world. Like the world is becoming software driven, and we're kind of holding these professions of the future, and also with the business world becoming digital. Then the opportunities, like I think job security, if you're a developer right now, is pretty high.
Yes.
The opportunities and the demand for development skills are only going to grow. And so we're in a pretty privileged spot. And I think it's important for all of us to find opportunities to spend that privilege a little bit, to use it to help maybe people that are not quite as privileged. So at Snyk, we've recently launched Snyk Impact. We've been community-minded all along. We've always donated all the proceeds from our events to good causes. We've always been not just free for open source, but also free for nonprofits. And we've had, I think, very conscientious organization that was very involved in supporting the volunteering in the community, and we gave time off. So it's always been important to us. We've now launched a dedicated program. A few months ago, we hired Bry, who's a guy to actually run our impact program called Snyk Impact. And we are scaffolding, sort of building a program around to also help all the great people in our community find ways to support these good causes, whether it is contributing code and going to help relevant nonprofit organizations actually improve their technology stack so they can do better. They can be more successful in the good that they are delivering, whether it is around helping startups that are built around non-for-profit, and kind of helping them scale, and a variety of other causes that are a bit more immediate, or also just an aggregation of places that you can donate, funds to, if that's the better way that you choose to do it. So we can put links to Snyk Impact in the path, and you can choose whether you want to do this through Snyk Impact or otherwise. But just to all the developers listening to it, like I think it's important. Sometimes we all have legit problems and challenges in our own kind of a day to day, but it's important to sometimes take a moment and realize we're in a pretty privileged spot, and take a moment to help others a little bit as well.
Yeah. Very well said. It makes me feel excited and a bit more proud to be a developer again.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, thank you so much, Guy, for taking the time. This was super interesting.
Oh no, thanks for having me on, and hope people enjoy both the perspectives and the solutions out there. Thanks everybody for.
Yeah.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.